So in this short YouTube video, we're going to start out with the Excel information that we use to make the table. And you can see that's right here. And we're going to use that same information that you collated to be able to make a graph that illustrates these results. And so the first choice is whether you will be reporting frequencies in that graph or whether you'll be reporting percentages. And you want to report percentages so that you can make a comparison between those who completed and didn't complete the shots. That is what we call, think of as an apples to apples comparison. And that is because a percentage is the proportion, it's the percentage of the total for a given group. So here we can see about 17% of those in the White Marsh Clinic completed their shots compared to 9% of those in that same clinic who didn't complete the shots. But if we looked at frequencies, it would appear to be about the same frequency. So go with the percentages. And what I'm going to do is put all of this information in the same Excel file. So we're going to label this tab as table. And we're going to label, and then we're going to copy the information that we had, that we used for the table, and we're going to put that in sheet 2. Doesn't really matter where you put it. And we're going to call that graph. And we decided to get rid of the frequencies, and so we're going to move this label to be in the same column as the percentages. So just cut. I'm cutting. I'm using Control X to cut and Control V to paste. And then we can just get rid of these frequency columns. We don't need those anymore. And if we did, we knew we could go back and get them over here. So now we have percentages, and we don't need that information there because it's the same for both. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that row. So we have two different groups here. Our shots completed, our shots not completed. We have our variables here, and we have those categories for the variables here. So to create a graph, we want to insert, and we can go and start by just taking a look at recommended charts up here at the top and see what they are recommending. So you can see that they have these various options. Some will look a little complicated. And we are going to go with just a simple, we're going to go with a bar graph. And so the choice is, do we want that bar graph to be horizontal or vertical? So I'm going to take a look at all charts to get a better look at what the options are. And this is the option I want. And so the reason I want this is because it has those categories at the bottom. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So when I choose that, it actually creates the graphic. So we can stretch this to be larger. And the reason I selected this graph is because it shows us these categories at the bottom, as well as the different options within each of those categories. And that's what I want. So notice how this lets me understand the information in an easy graphical way, an easy way to be able to see those, for example, those types of insurance in which you have a larger percentage of those completing their shots for all these types of insurance except medical assistance. And you see that when we look at practice, the only type of practice where you had a larger proportion with shots completed was in OB. So this lets you see at a glance the difference, but also the magnitude of difference. So you can see the size of the difference between these various categories. So there's a few things now that this graph needs to be able to have the reader understand it simply by looking at a graph. So this is true of either a graph or a table. You should have that graph or table labeled adequately such that the viewer can look at that and understand the meaning without having to read the text of any of your report. And that's always a good thing to consider as you're putting a graphic together. So one of the things that's needed is to label the meaning of these numbers. Right now we don't know what 0 to 100 means. So we are going to go in and look at, we're in the design aspect of Excel, and we want to add a chart element, and we want to add a title to the vertical axis, and that title will simply be percentage. And we want those labels to be large enough. I would say 10 is good enough, but if we change this to Arial, which is quite typically used for tables, notice that it looks a little bigger. So we're going to use Arial for these as well, and we're going to leave them at 10 so they're visible. And again here we'll change that to Arial. We have our chart title, and we'll make that in Arial as well. So we don't need to label these bottom, the metric for the bottom, because we have labels already that are very descriptive. They tell us what each of these is, and these labels will be the same labels that you have in your Excel file, and so you can always adjust these labels as you think would be needed so that the reader can understand them when they look at that graphic. So the last step was to add a title to the graph that would accurately convey what is being visualized in the graph. So one of the questions you have, whether you choose to include a table, choose to include a graph, is, or whether you don't need either, is what is this idea of when you're writing up your results section, whether it's as easy to understand the results by just conveying the numbers in a sentence, when a table will make those results easier for the reader to understand, and when a graphic will add meaning that's more readily apparent than the information that would be in a table. Whether you need both a graph and a table will depend on the situation, and those are all things that you need to consider when you write your results section.